Level up your hunting game and join the cause. Help preserve small-town Texas hunting culture and become a more successful hunter by learning the best ways to squeeze the most out of your budget and precious time out in the field. Welcome to the Feed Bandit Podcast. Here are your resident bandits, Richard Kinchlow and Jimmy Byrne.
Well, howdy, folks. Corn Bandit coming back at you with another Feed Bandit podcast. It is so good to be back on the air. Appreciate it. And that's it's my daughter's. Boy, that's bad timing. My daughter's little what do you call it? iPad thing going off anyway. Okay, I think we took care of that. But they're approaching 6 years old, so she'll definitely call back since I ignored her call. Yes. Okay. Back to business. So yes, here again tonight. Welcome. Good to be back on the air talking to everybody. In last week's episode, we talked, in particular, look at that. Look at that. I'm going to talk to her now. Hi, darling. Hi. Katie's watching the movie. Okay. So I'll have her call you. Okay. Okay, bye. Wow, that was really fun. So that was my youngest daughter's best friend. So, okay, so hopefully we'll see when she calls back because I don't think she'll take no for an answer. Talking in particular about this massive freeze, which I find out actually has a name. This winter storm that came down, just the repercussions of the storm are being felt all over the state, not only in the wildlife, but the fish too, which I won't get into too much of the fish because, you can just imagine it's awful, especially on the coast. The coast just, the saltwater fish, they can't deal with those sorts of things. And we're looking at a fish kill down there of epic proportions. And I hate that word epic. So here we are a couple weeks later, and we're really starting to see a lot of the results, unfortunately bad results of this freeze. And it's not only animals that have perished, it's food sources as well. So, something I didn't even think about. So it remains to be seen. And so I'm gonna go through two articles today that I found. One's gonna be in the Dallas Morning News in the outdoor section. I really like the Dallas Morning News outdoor writer. Seems like a real knowledgeable guy. He's got big shoes to fill. He's filling Mr. Sasser's shoes. So I'll kind of skim through that one. That one I actually read this one article that I have here in Texas Monthly. So I think it'll be interesting. We'll see what you guys think about it, and we'll take it from there. So this first article is from the Dallas Morning News, like I said, and it says the title is "How did Texas Fisheries and Wildlife and Habitats Hold Up in the Winter Storm? Early reports aren't so encouraging." So, and of course, you can look at this picture, and we're going to post these articles down below. And it's devastating. It's got a picture of it's probably on the coast, and a bunch of redfish and trout bottom up. I guess it's probably a good day to be a crab, right? Because they eat all that, and then what shorebirds are left are definitely going to take advantage of that. But really, this writer here kind of interviews some of the top powers that be. In particular, I think he's talking to one of the whitetail deer program manager for Texas Parks and Wildlife, a gentleman by the name of Alan Kane. And Mr. Kane basically goes on to say that he is not too concerned about the whitetail deer population in the state of Texas, except for a couple of older animals, of course. Again, that's to be expected. We got a lot of older animals that didn't fare very well. And again, this is really some of the key reasons why when you start to get those bucks up in the 5, 6, and 7.5 year old, especially the 7.5 year old range, whitetail deer typically don't live past 8.5. You've really got that supplemental feeding is so important. Okay. Cause these guys are out there slugging it out for the does. And it's very important. So like he goes on to say here, obviously some mortality of very old deer or those in poor body condition is to be expected. This is just nature, survival of the fittest. I mean, that's perfect. And that's what we're talking about. And again, like we've always said on this on this podcast, you can't play God. I don't care how many protein feeders you have. I don't care if you've got a butler out there taking care of them. You just can't beat it. You can't play God, but you can certainly do what you can to try to help these critters get through, get through this type of situation. So, one of the things Kane does point out is talking about the potential damage done to a lot of the habitat. Okay, and he comes down here and talks specifically about a lot of the some of these brush species in South Texas, that had green leaves before the freeze, but are now dead. They're brown. And so he says, we're also seeing some impact on winter weeds, which are critical for deer this time of year and into the early spring. Now, of course, as we know, in Texas, spring green up typically comes in March. So these animals are a couple of weeks away. But obviously, any loss in habitat, especially feed plants or food sources is definitely devastating. And it also depends on the area. You look at the hill country. We were talking last time, about the hill country and some of those places that have been just tremendously overgrazed. Back then I didn't even think about the fact that, not only are these places overgrazed, okay, but the weeds, the forbs that are available, the grass that is available for the exotics probably could burn up and freeze and die. Then you've really got yourself a problem. So I like this article. It really points out a lot of good stuff, especially about the food sources. Again, some things I didn't think about. And of course, he goes on and talks a little bit about, how hopefully a lot of the snow and moisture and whatnot will be soaked into the soil and will lead to a nice spring green up, which it's kind of crazy. Here we are, I think a week and a half, 2 weeks after that storm, and it's 67 and 70 degrees outside. So definitely a nice change of pace. So he goes on a little bit further and talks, starting to get into the exotics again, the axis deer, the blackbuck antelope, definitely two of the more popular, if not the most popular exotic species in the state of Texas. Extremely important to the livelihood of a lot of these ranches. And of course, you got the trickle down effect. What's good for the ranches that brings in people are good for those little towns. So, this exotic die off and this potential crisis that we have in a way is definitely far reaching and impacts more than just the people hunting them. So obviously something to think about. But he comes in here and talks about how he's heard reports of, axis deer that are typically extremely wily, okay, and are extremely crazy. They're kind of one of those animals that you see one day and then you don't see them for a year. The next time you see them, there's 300 of them. It's crazy like that. Talking about how they've really let go a lot of their natural instinct because of because of the storm, just to survive. And they talk about how a lot of them, a lot of the axis and whatnot came up into barns and things of that nature, which is just crazy. Again, you just don't see that happening. So we'll continue on here on this other article about the axis deer in particular here in a moment. But jumping on, they talk to another specialist, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Wild Turkey Program leader, a gentleman by the name of Jason Harden. And he talks about the wild turkey. And again, he basically says wild turkeys are big and hardy birds. Likewise, TPNW Wild Turkey Program leader Jason Harden isn't expecting to see any major impacts from the big freeze. And he basically says the turkey should be fine. They should have enough fat and energy reserves to survive. Of course, any of the malnourished, injured, sick birds are going to pass away. But again, just like deer, it's just kind of survival of the fittest. This is nature at its best. And of course, as we know, nature can be cruel, but unfortunately very effective too. So he does talk about how they will have depleted fat reserves. So if turkey season was that started in Texas, a couple of weeks ago, you probably have a pretty good hunt because they're hitting those food sources very, very hard. So he talks a little bit about how the depleted fat reserves could actually have an impact on the nesting season. So it reduces reproductive efforts. But if it stays warm and green, he's basically saying we should be good to go. I've always been taught that wild turkey hens will not go and actually lay eggs until the soil reaches X temperature. So if we have a cold spring, of course, that ends up being real bad. Now at Rancho Bandito, the past couple of years, we've had extremely warm springs, so our turkey cup runneth over. So that's kind of the situation with the turkey. Go on to talk to another specialist for Texas Parks and Wildlife, gentleman by the name of Robert Perez. He is the upland game bird leader, and he's talking about quail, the money bird, as kind of like to call him. And again, quail. We've talked a little bit about quail, and as far as survival is concerned, they really need everything to kind of go their way in order for them to survive long term. So, he talks in here about with the right escape cover available, the Covey formations does an excellent job of heat retention. So they all kind of huddle together. Snowfall, especially dense snowfall, can obviously affect their flushing cover. Didn't even really think about that, but it's true. And of course, the other thing is make it difficult for them to to find food. He does talk about how lasting events like the 3 or 4 day spell could be trouble for him. So I guess we'll have to see. And he talks about them again. We talked about this, but being able to scratch, that's kind of what they do, scratch for their food, right? If they got to dig through ice, that's a problem, and obviously once that fat reserve has been burned through them, then the animal dies. So, hopefully, quail have made a great comeback in the state of Texas. We don't want to say that too loud, of course, right? Because it wasn't just but 2 years ago or 3 years ago when they were, on the brink of disaster. So, fingers crossed for the quail. Hopefully they'll do okay. The article goes on, talks to the migratory bird program leader, a guy named Owen Fitzsimmons, great name, by the way. And it talks about the doves, the ducks, and the bats. And of course, I think a lot of people have heard a lot about the bats, and bat situation was not good. A lot of bats died, which sucks. But again, they're just not used to this. It talks here a little bit about multiple blue-winged teal. They've been reporting lots of blue-winged teal being dead. Now, of course, you listen to this show, you should be an expert about blue-winged teal, because as we know, blue-winged teal are the first duck to make their way from Antarctica or wherever Santa Claus lives during that first cold snap, quote unquote, and that they see in August, to make their way down to Texas. And then from Texas in September, they'll be out of there, and they're making their way to Colombia, Mexico, to where it's very warm. So obviously those birds coming back to the snow here on their way back north, that's just not going to make their trip any easier. Will we see a change in the teal harvest recommendations? Probably not. If you're going to have if you're going to have any of the duck species that's struggling, teal's the one you want, because they are, thank God, very plentiful, and they just happen to be my favorite ducks. So, even though we didn't shoot many this year, but I'm not bitter about that or anything. Won't be thinking about it for the next several months up until, September 29th when the season starts again. But you know how that goes. So, that is the first article. All right, folks, and the second article that we're going to be talking about today, and again, this one I haven't read as much, but this was in the Texas Monthly, which I tend to disagree with some, and then this title kind of ticks me off a little bit. Maybe it's me reading in too much of it, but So it says axis deer have have overrun. It's not like they're gone. Overrun the Texas Hill Country. The winter storm devastated them, and then it says the kind of subtitle is exotic species brought to Texas from Africa and Asia fared poorly in freezing temperatures. Before we jump into this, I think it is very important to say that yes, absolutely. You know, exotics were brought here. They were brought here for hunting and whatnot. But I will tell you this much right here. You know, the fact that in Texas we can hunt year round is tremendous. Again, we talked about kind of in that first little segment we did in the article about the importance of these ranches having game animals for people to hunt. So people fly here from all over the country. Okay. They drive in from Texas. They use our roads. They use our gas. They support our small towns. So, you know, exotics, yes, they can certainly be a problem. In the hill country, they can certainly be a problem. And yeah, they're causing some issue with the white-tailed deer. But you know what? They're supporting our small Texas towns. So, you know, I don't think it's I don't think it's that big of a that big of a huge thing. So this article really kind of talks about the situation that's about the exotic, about axis deer in particular, and you know what exactly is going on. So this article kind of says it says the state of Texas is a home of approximately 130 so-called Texotics, which I think is actually a really cool little name, which hunters pay thousands of dollars for the opportunity to shoot a trophy buck or bull, who whose lineages are typically traced to the hot climates of Africa and Asia. And so, yes, absolutely, that is definitely true. But of course, you know, the article talks about bucks and bulls. Well, I guess what they also shoot does, hinds, and cows too, which are the female species. So. Let's not make it think here it's all about out there shooting a trophy, trophy animals all the time. Talks a little bit. It says the winter storm Uri, which I had no idea had a name. I think it's kind of funny. It's a Russian name too. Well, I think it's Uri, URI, devastated the industry. Charlie Seal, the Exotic Wildlife Association president, told the Washington Post, give me a break, that his Hill Country ranch alone lost more than 2 million in animals, including 85 axis during the storm. That's incredible. I hate to hear that, and I definitely feel for him. It goes down here and it talks about a gentleman, a Texas Tech doctoral student who's guy's probably a genius. If I had $1 million, I'd give it to him with a great school. And he says, the axis suffered from the freeze throughout their range, but primarily in open grasslands where they couldn't bed down in thick cover. I think that's a really important piece because not all of the hill country, but a lot of the hill country that I've seen has got those gorgeous little mid-story oaks, right? And they got a lot of rocks. But in some pastures, they don't have a lot of native grasses. And of course, those native grasses, like we're so blessed to have at Rancho Bandito, are insulators. I mean, it's just like sitting on a bale of hay, for cattle. So I think that that's extremely important. I think that's why, and obviously the majority of the axis are in the hill country, and I think that's why they statistically took such a beating down there. But and then it goes on to say the timing was particularly bad for axis. Is about 70% of the species reproduced in February. I had no idea. So this cold basically hit them when they're when they were most vulnerable. I had no idea. I had no clue. Now the big thing in Texas is they talk about the exotics and they're breeding all the time and how they have no established breeding season like white-tailed deer do. So, but what this is saying is that, they 70% of the species reproduces in February. Did not know that. I don't know if that's the case on Rancho Bandito. I know that I hear our axis roar, if you will. And they typically do that. And they typically do that in like July. So that's very interesting. This article kind of goes on to talk about some of the folks that are in the hill country and who are not big fans of the axis. There's no doubt about it that axis deer are exotics. They definitely interfere with the white-tailed deer. Let's not forget, axis deer are grazers and browsers. Okay, so that is very important because that means they definitely do compete. And in a situation like this, where the native grazing plants are done, that axis deer, herd of axis deer, they'll flip right over to the browse, which of course will interfere with the whitetail. Another very interesting piece here. It says that some of the stomachs of the dead axis deer were filled with undigested plant material. To Leslie, which is one of the volunteers who's examining dead deer, it says to Leslie, it looked and smelled like yard clippings. Their fecal samples were also largely undigested, leading Buchholz to speculate that hypothermia could have rendered the deer unable to digest plants by the changing temperature of bacteria in their guts. Wow, that is definitely definitely a problem. So let's see here. Leslie, who describes himself as a sworn enemy of free-ranging axis deer. Oppenheimer and Buchholz all participated in the Hill Country Alliance's Axis Deer Control Program, which I think is great. I know they definitely need that in a lot of places, which launched earlier this month to address the ever-increasing populations of axis. The species has been blamed for overbrowsing the hill country out of competing native white-tailed deer food and causing erosion and damage in rivers and creeks. Now, I had no idea that was the case. That is crazy. That's always been a problem with the axis deer. I didn't know the whole erosion piece. That's absolutely nuts. But and of course they go on to talk here basically about he says given their ability to bounce back and reproduce, I don't know what long-term effect this will have on the axis. They should come back pretty quickly. Says axis are notably wily creatures and are less likely to visit game feeding and watering stations than white-tailed deer. That is certainly true. What else does it say here? Let's see, one of the things they have said is because of this opportunity, since these animals are so wily and they don't see them all the time, he says that because of this situation, the researchers have been able to research these animals and check them out. Which again, there's not a lot of research on the axis deer in the state of Texas, so on and so forth. I would think a lot of the money from the Texas legislature would be used to for what funds available, I should say, would be used for the native game species. So seeing all these axis deer up close, seeing how this freeze has affected them, I think can definitely benefit us in the future. It's some closing thoughts I've kind of had on this whole thing. It will be very interesting to see just how quickly a lot of these ranches bounce back. Again, at this point, are we going to have any more snow? Well, here it is, the 1st of March. I doubt it. Not thinking that we're going to have any nasty weather. Of course, we could always have the tornadoes and all that kind of good stuff. But the long-term blanketing snow, I don't think so. So what are the chances we're going to have another freeze like this again? God, I have no idea. It's my first one to ever go through, and I'm 40 years old. So, can you call this a 100-year freeze? Maybe so. But I think there's a lot of folks that learned a lot of lessons, from this situation. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more people watching the temperature or watching the forecast rather. And I think you're also going to see a lot of people who weren't supplemental feeding get into supplemental feeding. Cause again, I don't want to say that the supplemental feeding saved the animals at Rancho Bandito, but it sure as hell didn't hurt. And to give you an update on that, if some people have been wondering, as far as our black bug and axis herd is concerned, we only lost one black bug antelope. And crazy enough, he died right on our front porch, which is, of course, makes my wife sad. He said he was probably knocking at the door. I'm like, well, you know what? If he was, and I'm thinking to myself, what if he was there? Would I open the door? And of course, the answer is probably yes. Knowing my luck, after he warms up, he'd gore me, crap all over my house, and that would suck. But hey, at least I saved his life, right? But no, there's a lot we can learn from this situation, and I hope that obviously I hope it never happens again. So But rest assured, these critters are hardy. They will certainly bounce back in a good way. I hope and pray this is the effects of this aren't too hard on the small towns and whatnot. So, that being said, for the folks that are going to be going on exotic hunt, maybe they've got one planned with turkey season, they've got one planned this summer. And if you're booked to hunt a certain species like an axis deer in a certain amount, a certain type of axis deer as far as the points or whatnot is concerned, I'd probably call ahead and make sure, hey, are you what's the availability of what I'm looking for, because they could have lost a tremendous amount of animals. So anyway, just a little tip for you. But anyway, that is all I got. We will do something. We'll talk about something other than the big freeze next week, but a lot of good information on this stuff. So I think it's important, and talk about a big lesson learned. So until next time, my friends, thank you so much. Support your local feed store. Oh, happy Texas Independence Day. God knows we need to talk about that more, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks for listening to the Feed Bandit podcast. If you like what we discuss on the show, be sure to sign up to our email list to get even more killer hunting ideas, tips, tricks, and exclusive deals on innovative hunting gear and services delivered straight to your inbox. Sign up over at feedbandit.com or simply by texting the word bandit to 33777. See you on the next one, and remember, support your local feed store.